Hello everyone, my name is Ellen Benedict and I'm a labor economist in the Department of Economics in the College of Business at Bowling Green State University. We decided that our second webcast would be about unemployment. We decided on this topic because we know how important it is to the firms you work for and to those of you who are out there searching for jobs. We subtitled this, "Why Can't We Get Back to Normal?" And if you think about it, normal means a lot of different things to different people. For some people, they want our unemployment rate to be as low as it was in the late 1990s at 4%. We will talk about what's normal toward the end of this talk, but what we want to do is figure out why we're at a stagnant 8.3% unemployment rate. We thought that we would start with the August unemployment report. This comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it uses two different surveys to give us our numbers. The first is a household survey called the CPS, or the Current Population Survey. The second comes from the CES, which is a survey of establishments. And if we look at this, the CES tells us that non-farm payrolls increased by 163,000 jobs in July. That sounds pretty good, and in fact, if we look at it, over 2012, we've had an average of 151,000 new jobs every month, which is very similar to the average that we had in 2011. The problem we have is that the number of unemployed persons and the unemployment rate has remained essentially unchanged. We worry about this because we know that when consumer demand increases, which means GDP increases, the unemployment rate should fall, but we're not seeing that. So we want to know, why is unemployment falling if new jobs are being created? And I think there are two things to think about. One is the labor supply, and the other is the number of new jobs. We start with our formal definition of unemployment, which is U3. U3 counts people who are unemployed as a percent of the civilian labor force. It includes those who are jobless, actively seeking work, and able to start work. If we look at this over time, we see the blue line, which is our unemployment rate, and the gray bars, which are our recessions. I want you to focus on two recessions, one that was in 1982 to 81 to 82, and then our most recent one, which just occurred in 2007-09. Those are the two largest recessions we've had since the Great Depression. If you notice, the last one is the biggest, and the biggest since the Great Depression, and it was about 18 months. Notice that the blue line always spikes, meaning that the unemployment rate spikes up near the end of a recession. But the thing to think about here is the difference. Even though these were both severe recessions, the last one is slowly going back to a low unemployment rate, whereas the one in the 80s went back fairly quickly. If we think about why that might be, there are two things to think about. One is a more expansive measure of unemployment called U6. U6 counts all the total unemployed, as we did before, but they have a couple extra people in there, and actually quite a few in this last recession. They include people who are marginally attached to the labor force. These would be people who have given up looking for work because they've looked too long. And it includes people who are underemployed, people with a certain skill set who can't find a job in their field. It also includes people who are working part-time, but would like to be full-time. If we compare the two, we can see one of the problems that we see with this last recovery. The blue line, again, is the unemployment rate. The bars are recessions, and the red line is our U6. It's only been collected since 1994, when they changed the Current Population Survey. Notice that the gap is always fairly wide, about 7 or 8 points up until this last recession. But after the last recession, what we see is a growing gap. So one of the problems we have is our labor supply pool includes not only those who are officially unemployed, but all these people who are marginally attached. A second problem with the labor supply is looking at how long it takes to get back to employment. If we look at some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for people who are jobless for over 1 year, we can see that there's a big difference between before the recession and right after it. The percent of people who were looking for a job at least 1 year or more was only about 9 or 10% back at the end of 2007, but it's gone up to 31% by the middle of 2010. This is the latest data that I could find on the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What I did then was I included what we had before, the unemployment rate, the recession bars, but I added our jobless rate of a year or more. And notice how much bigger that bump is compared to before. If we look at job openings on the other end, we can also talk about job creation. This information comes from JOLTS, Job Opening and Labor Turnover Surveys, that are also establishment data. If you notice, we have our recessions in 2001 and in 2007 to the middle of 9. And I have the total number of job openings in the private and public sector jobs. And notice how it falls, but how dramatic it fell back in this last recession. Notice also that it follows what we had in terms of the private sector. So the private sector is the one that lost a lot of jobs, and it also is slowly gaining jobs back. The other point to think about here is the public sector, the green line at the bottom. Notice that it stays fairly flat except for a couple of bumps, and if you really would draw a line across the entire space of time, you would see that the public sector job openings have fallen considerably, and we know that they've lost about 600,000 jobs in just the last 2 years. So one problem is job openings, and if we tie that to our net job growth from the CES, we can see what's going on over time. We see these dips where we had recessions, and notice the last dip is the most serious, and then we see large bumps where we have job growth. The job growth was much more dramatic in the 80s and 90s than what we have recently. And in fact, if we look at the December 2007 through June 2009 job loss, it's about 7.39 million jobs. After, even though the economy was recovering in terms of GDP, we lost another 1.18 million jobs. Since 2010, we've only gained about 4 million jobs. So we need about 5 million more jobs to get back to where we were before the recession, and this is excluding issues dealing with employment to population growth or changes in the labor force. So my point is that we have little chance of getting back to a 4% unemployment rate anytime soon. The last point I have is this natural rate of unemployment. I have the same graph as before, but notice that the natural rate of unemployment is much flatter. It's the red line that you see there. It tells us that if we want the economy to be stable, that we really don't want unemployment to be jumping below 5% or above 5%. And in fact, they've readjusted it to be about 5.5%. So getting from 8.3 to 5.5% is still a challenging job, but might be a little bit easier than the 4% some people talk about. Let me conclude by just saying that we have some useful websites for you if you want to look at the data yourself. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to call me or to email me. Thank you, and have a good rest of the day.